Welcome everyone, I am James West and this is the Lion's Den Academy, where we strive to bring you closer to God through an in-depth study of His Word. Now the video I'm about to play for you is actually part of a longer video that is part of a verse-by-verse study that we are doing throughout the book of Matthew. Specifically, this is coming from part of the Sermon on the Mount, found in chapter 6 of Matthew, verses 5 through 15, where Jesus is talking about how not to pray and how to pray. And in that, I unpack the topic of prayer and kind of do a bit of a Bible study on that. And since I thought that just that section alone could be beneficial to other people that might not be wanting to go through a full verse-by-verse study of the Bible or of the book of Matthew, although I would encourage you to check that out if you do, like this video and like the way I present the information. But without further ado, let's jump into this study on prayer. And as always, I would love to hear any feedback that you might have and any unanswered questions that you feel that I might not have answered. Let's just take a second here to talk about prayer as a whole and as a concept. The word prayer and the concept of prayer, it's so frequently used that even most non-Christians, when they see a prayer emoji, they know what that's really representing and that it somehow involves talking to God. Yet at the same time, such a seemingly simple act, it can leave people, even like tenured Christians, sometimes with questions as far as, really about what prayer is and how it works, especially if God already has a plan for everything. So with that being said, I'd like to, briefly try to explain prayer as a whole, and hopefully in doing so answer some, underlying questions that, you might have about that, so that once we get to, the blueprint that Jesus is laying out, we have a firm foundation that we can build upon. So in its very essence, prayer is simply talking to God. Now, I'm sure you've heard the phrase that Christianity, it's not a religion, instead it is a relationship, and it's one with our triune God. And it's not just any relationship. And as it just with any relationship, whether that's with your spouse or your friend, coworker, you name it, communication. It plays an enormous role in really what the health of that relationship is going to look like and whether it's going to last. It's not just the quality of communication, but it's also the content and the quantity of it. And that's the case whether that's any relationship. And if we hope to have a real and in-depth and close relationship with God, that is at least equal, but hopefully, surpassing that of our spouse, then, our communication with God needs to be at least equal, if not greater than our communication with our spouse. We need to be, just as frequent, just as open, and just as soul-bearing. You see, our Father, he loves to hear our voices, and there's nothing too small or too large to bring to Him. In fact, the Bible actually encourages us to let your requests be made known to God, as shown in Philippians 4:6. However, at the very same time, it is also possible to ask or pray wrongly. And as James 4:3 states, it says, "You ask and do not receive, because you ask wrongly, to spend it on your passions." So what does that mean, really, to ask wrongly? Well, James does kind of allude to the core idea of what that means by how he ends that verse, when he says that you would spend it on your passions. So really, this is the idea of, praying for things for personal gain, as though God was your personal genie that, is going to grant you every wish at your command. And that's a pretty cocky attitude to have towards the almighty creator of everything. And in fact, off the top of my head, I could be wrong, but off the top of my head, the only time that in the Bible God has ever acted like a genie and pretty much said, "Hey, whatever you wish, I'm going to grant you," was to Solomon. And he came to him in a dream and said, "Hey, tell me what you desire and it's going to be yours." And, Solomon, being a true, person that, at least at the beginning, had a true heart of, for God, he said, "Well, really all I want is to simply have the wisdom to be able to effectively lead your people." And, that is the type of prayer that even if we were given that genie sort of, option that we should be having. It should be kingdom oriented. And because of Solomon's focus on his prayer when he did do that prayer, God then said, well, you know what, since you've asked such a noble ask of me here, I'm not going to only just give you wisdom. You have wisdom greater than anyone that's ever lived or anyone that ever will live, and I'm also going to shower you with riches and power and glory and all that. That being said, we should be asking for things that are going to be advancing God's kingdom and His glory, instead of simply for personal gain. And we should also keep in our prayers that it's not our will, but God's will that we're really praying for. And that's the best example I can think of. That is the one that Jesus set in the Garden of Gethsemane. And even though he knew he was, about to be, suffering, just enormous pain and torture and abuse and ridicule, like so much so that he was literally, sweating blood about it. He had the same, he's praying to God, saying, "Hey, if there's any other way that we can possibly do this, please let that come to pass instead." But at the same time, it's not my will, but your will that's to be done. So we should really keep that approach in mind, when we're praying for deliverance of really any number of issues, both for ourselves and for others, whether it's about, the loss of a job, financial issues, serious illness, if the outcome, we want the outcome that we're praying for, or I should rather say we should pray for the outcome to be something that is going to advance God's kingdom. And we're praying for God's will to be done, regardless of whatever that might be. And it might not be something that we're, really hoping for or wanting, at least at the personal, at that time. But we are declaring that we have faith in knowing that our God is a good God, and, we know that He has the ultimate best direction and plan laid out, and we have complete trust and faith in that plan. And even if it doesn't make sense to us right now, later on, whether it's here or in heaven, it will all come together and be like, okay, I understand. So you see, while God does have a plan for everything, one of the main purposes of praying is actually to internally change the person that is doing the praying. So by talking it over with God and pouring our heart out to Him, we then begin to shift our focus from our human perspective of the situation to God's perspective of the situation, which lets us rest in the security of His goodness. And we also begin to see things from a kingdom perspective of how things that the enemy uses for evil, God then turns for good. And we also begin to recognize how big our God is, really in comparison to that problem. Now, take, for example, what Paul says in Philippians 1:12. I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. And he's talking about him being imprisoned, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard. So, the enemy had locked Paul away, one of God's most enthusiastic apostles. But God then turned that situation for good. And that most enthusiastic apostle was able to radically spread God's word to the imperial guard. So that's a pretty profound way of using evil it's something that was intended for evil by the enemy for good. Now, the last thing I want to mention about prayer here before moving on to Jesus's blueprint is a bit that's found in Matthew 7:7. Where Jesus, he shares a simple way to remember the basics of prayer, which is ask, seek, and knock. The verse goes, "Ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you." Now, once again, this is of course talking about the right kind of prayer and not asking wrongly, as we talked about from James. However, with this passage talking about knocking on doors, I want to use that to talk about how some prayers are answered quickly, some are answered after a very long time, and then some are also a flat out no. You see, sometimes we are either knocking at the wrong door completely, and sometimes we just aren't at our stage of development of where we need to be in order to have that door open for us. I might be showing my age here, but I'm not sure if you ever played Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. But there were progressive different doors in this castle to go to different worlds, and you had to have a certain number of stars that you collected as you developed through the game in order to open each different door. It's almost equivalent to that. So the problem is that sometimes it can be hard, though, to tell whether you're simply knocking on a door that will never open, or if you simply have to wait and continue to develop yourself. And of course, we don't want to give up on a door that's eventually going to open, but at the same time, we don't want to wait forever at a door that never will. So what are we to do? Well, unfortunately, I can't give you a definite answer here without knowing you or the entire situation. But I would suggest a couple of things that you might want to do if you might feel that you're in this place. The first is to pray. I'm sure that's probably you were expecting that one based on the content of today's video. But truly open up your heart to God in a private place and pour out your worries and fears and ask for wisdom and direction. Next, understand that God is always developing you and making you stronger in your faith, and use that understanding in your prayers to ask how you can grow from the issues and obstacles that you are facing, since the development is all about preparing you for the battles to come. So consider how in Exodus 13, God had Moses take the long way around. There was a quick way right through the Philistines, but God said if they went up there, they probably would have gone to war with the Philistines, and they would have been scared and fled right back to Egypt. You see, they had been developed to the stage of being able to trust Moses to lead him out of slavery into Egypt, into this wilderness. They saw the signs and wonders that Moses had as far as the plagues and all that he sent down on the Pharaoh. However, they had not been developed yet, as they would be down the road as we continue on in the Old Testament. They hadn't been led in the wilderness, sustaining on the manna for 40 years that would just appear each morning, that would feed them. They hadn't gone 40 years without any of their shoes or clothes, wearing out one bit. They hadn't been led across the desert by a pillar of smoke or cloud, showing them the way to go or where to stay. And that turned into a pillar of fire at night that continued to lead them and let them know where to go, when to stay, and all that. It took that point to get them to trust, along with a bunch of other stuff, of course, to get them to be developed to the point to where when they encountered all these enemies, and they were being led to the promised land that was, of course, inhabited by other people, to where they then at that point they were like, well, God's fighting our battles for us. We have nothing to be afraid of, and that ends up being kind of a theme that goes on as far as whether in the Old Testament, as far as whether people are trusting the Lord to be fighting the battle for them, or if they have the pride to try to battle it themselves. And the last thing that I would recommend, if you feel that you are in this situation, is to simply have conversations with those that are closest with you and know you the best, and ask them for the unbiased opinion on if they feel that this is something that you are called to do. If they kind of recognize the same sort of talents and spiritual gifts that have been bestowed upon you, and if that's and that is something that you should still be working for. Now, whatever their answer it is, you definitely can't hold it against them. That could ruin that relationship if you ask for that and you're not prepared to receive an answer contrary to what you're expecting. But it's really only for the benefit of you. That way, you're not continuing to strive towards something that might not be appropriate for you, or does give you the motivation to continue to press on. But for example, if you thought that you were destined to be the next biggest worship singer out there, and that was the impact that you're going to have on the kingdom, and you're not finding success there, and you ask your friend what their opinion was, and they tell you, well, I think you really sound like two cats fighting in the back alley when you sing, well, then that means that you probably have spiritual gifts elsewhere that are going to be benefiting the kingdom better than continuing to knock on that door that's probably going to be a no. With that being said, I hope that has at least laid somewhat of a foundation of prayer for you so that we can even better apply the teaching of Jesus that we're about to go over now. But if you do happen to have any additional unanswered questions, by all means, please leave a comment down below. I don't want you to walk away from this feeling that you came here searching for an answer about prayer and it wasn't answered. I will definitely get back to you as quickly as I can with that. Well, I hope that you found this video helpful here for you. If so, I would just ask that you leave a like and a comment below. It really does help YouTube with their algorithm push this content out to as many people as possible. Additionally, if you're not already, I would ask that you subscribe as well as hit the notification bell if you would like to be updated when we push out new content like this. So with that being said, I look forward to seeing you next time. And until then, God bless and God keep you.